Continuity Conversations on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by 337. Find out more by going to 337.ca. We're talking today to the CEO and founder of 337, Derryn Shrosbree. Derryn, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Shaun. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing really good. We've talked in the first segment about what is my farm worth. What we're going to do here today is we're going to dive a little bit deeper into a really good question for the more senior generation on the farm. Mom and dad, or maybe it's just mom, or maybe just dad, however the farm is structured. Asking yourself this question. Now we've decided what is the farm worth. Am I leaving a legacy or am I creating a liability? Those are big differences.
Yes, and we touched on it in the first question, right? The first question is how much is my enterprise, farm, and business worth? The second question is, am I creating a legacy or leaving a liability? And we touched on the mathematics. Remember the 10 million example, 551. There's the mathematics. And that's all good. So generation one, let's use easy math and say generation one is 70, we're 50, and then there's 25-year-olds. So easy math steps down, right? So now that we've found, using the same example, the 10 goes to 5, goes to 1, right? So let's say the generation at 70 is still on the farm, and they're going to transition off the farm payroll, but they continue to live on the farm, which is because they have knowledge, they have experience, they have skill, and they want to pass that down, and they want to enjoy their grandchildren and their children on the farm. So they're not leaving the farm, the income is changing, the way they get paid. So let's say, for example, the 70-year-old owns everything. So in a lot of farm cases, there's a lot of control at the generation one level, which is the oldest level on the farm.
Yeah.
They haven't relinquished control yet because, in their opinion, they're going to take the lug nuts with them when they go, right? Which is not the best strategy, but it is a strategy. So what we want to do is, once we've isolated and granulated that $1 million of liability, we want to make sure that the liability doesn't grow over time. So let's say the 70-year-old is still on the farm and he's not going to relinquish control. What we could do is we could make sure that that $1 million of tax liability stays exactly where it is. It doesn't change. That's called an estate freeze. So what we do is we freeze the value of the farm and the business at, in this case, it would be $10 million. So we freeze the value at 10, which means the 70-year-old is worth $10 million. He's frozen the liability and the legacy at the same number. So 551, remember that, right? That's interesting because now the 50-year-old, all the future growth goes to the 50-year-old, right? Because the future farm growth and the future farm liability grows with the second generation, which is that 50-year-old person. That's really handy because we've got clarity and control all the way through the generations to make sure that that value is crystallized, right? So the 50-year-old then has more skin in the game. He feels part of it because he's now, the values accruing to him and his work. And we can then push that tax bill out by using the third point, which we can get to in a second, is basically who's in the tent with you. But what we've done is we've structured 3 generations on the farm with clarity and control. We've frozen the value. We've then transferred all future value to the next generation, right? And we've deferred the tax because the 3 Ds in continuity planning is, on a tax perspective, divide, defer, don't pay. Divide, defer, don't pay. So what we're doing is we're dividing the tax bill, then we're deferring it, and then ultimately there's a strategy which is coming down the pipe where we don't have to pay it. We don't pay it. Our kids don't pay it. We get a third party to pay it, right?
Yeah, and I think a big part of this question is the older generation, from a theoretical standpoint, asking themselves, what do I want this farm, what do I really want? Do I want this farm to kind of die with me and I sort of pretend it wants to go on? Or am I actually looking at leaving a legacy where that next generation, the generations after it, can really flourish? And I've kind of laid that groundwork. And I think a lot of people are like, oh yeah, of course, I'm concerned about our farm's legacy. It's a 100-year farm, or it's a 200-year farm. But a lot of people, what they say and what they do on this file, they are not in parallel.
There's a huge disconnect. It's 88% disconnect, right? Because as I said at the beginning of our chat, why are we doing this? We're doing this for the family. And yet family continuity and farm continuity is always kicked down the road. There's people procrastinate. And I think that if we can remove the obstacles to why they procrastinate, which in my opinion is the billable hour and invoice fatigue, if we can remove those obstacles, it makes it much easier for people to engage and stay with the process to get it done, to get it finished. But yes, it's astounding at how I can speak about this. And once again, about 80-90% of people. So, yep, I definitely want it. I definitely want it. And then they go plant canola, which is great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's what they do, right? Farmers know that because they know how to do it. They're comfortable in either raising beef or chickens or planting canola. This is foreign. So they're like, oh, don't worry about it. Next year's harvest will solve the problem. It's not gonna. It's really not gonna. Yeah.
And I think by starting with what is my farm worth, it puts some dollars on the table because I think one of the, I don't know, tactics or maybe, and it could be just because of ignorance, there tends to be like there's a lot of financial conservatism on farms. And so there's like this sort of, and this happens in with other entrepreneurs and other industries too, but is the I don't know if we'll have enough money like for from that 75 to the 90, right? And so there's like I don't know, we got to hold on to this and we got to have control of it because I either am worried I'm not going to have enough to finish my life or I'm worried the younger generation is going to screw it up and that's going to impact my ability to finish.
Right.
And by starting with the what is it worth, it actually puts some clarity to that. And it sort of, I think, in many cases, probably removes some of the that argument. Would you agree with that?
100%. Yes, absolutely. Giving you the clarity of where's the starting point? Like, what are we working with? We got to get to the starting point. So I think that is a very, very good point that you make, where it's once the once you've demystified the number,
Yeah.
it becomes tangible. It's a tangible number. It's like it's to the penny how much your inputs cost, right? You know exactly how much it is, how much you need to buy, et cetera, et cetera. So from an enterprise perspective, why don't we know that number? Why don't we know the number that is taxable and not taxable, right? Why is that not clear? Well, I believe that people have done a disservice to the farming community by not showing people this is the clarity. And once you have clarity, then you can control, to your point, the finish. What does my
Yeah.
finish look like? Because I have clarity, I can now control my finish, which means I can have confidence of staying on farm because I have enough resources based on these two numbers which come together.
Mm. And we you pose question two or point two about do you want to leave a legacy or a liability? Well, you could do both, which is you could leave a legacy of liability, right? And which is that's like really terrible.
Yeah.
Like because from the younger generation standpoint, mom and dad thought they were like doing us this great deal, where really what they left us with is a farm that can't cash flow itself, and maybe a whole bunch of debt, and there's this big tax bill. We didn't talk about that. We really didn't sit down and figure this all out, and now I'm as the younger generation I'm kind of stuck with it, and I'm saddled with it. I'm now worried about what legacy I can leave my next generation because the older generation kind of screwed it up for me.
Yeah, inadvertently, and it's not necessarily they screwed it up. It's actually shown it's a macro. The macro is when acreage was $300 an acre, there wasn't much of a continuity issue. When acreage is $10,000 an acre or 5,000 wherever you are, there's a serious continuity issue because now your tax bill is so big it can ruin the farm, and it often does, right? Because back in the day, you could if you had 1,000 acres at $300, now you have 1,000 acres at where I farm. Some of the stuff's going at $38,000 an acre, right? You can't go to the bank and say, oh, by the way, can I have $6 million to pay my tax bill? The bank's going to say no. So what do? You have to sell acreage. That's bad, right? That rips your farm in half. But in 1980, when things were $300 an acre, you could go to the bank and ask them for 600 grand. They were like, yeah, sure, right? So the numbers are different, right? There's a big difference in the numbers. So now it's becoming the tax bill. And as you know, farmers are asset rich and cash poor, always. There's just 99% of the folks I speak to have the same thing. With a lot of money, but have very little liquidity.
Mm.
What happens with the tax bill is it pushes the liquidity of the farm over the tipping point because the farm cannot handle more debt, which is pure debt. Debt when you buy it and you put a Meridian bin on or you put another barn, that's not debt. That's you building the farm. But when you pay a tax bill, that's gone forever. That's just money that just evaporates. And you have to then pay the interest and the principal back. That is ruinous to a farm. Ruinous, right? So without correct continuity planning, it becomes very difficult for the finish for whatever generation, whether it's yours or the kids or the grandkids, right? So yeah, it's because of land valuation, in my opinion, as opposed to farmers not like I shouldn't say giving a shit. They do care, they just don't know where to start. And then the land value went up, so they're kind of stuck in this tsunami, this perfect storm of this tax tidal wave coming down the pipe in the next 8 to 10 years. And if it's not dealt with, a lot of acreage is going to be owned by the bank, which kind of sucks.